Penutian is a proposed grouping of language families that includes many Native American languages of Western North America, predominantly spoken at one time in Washington, Oregon, and California. The existence of a Penutian stock or phylum has been the subject of debate among specialists. Even the unity of some of its component families has been disputed. Some of the problems in the comparative study of languages within the phylum are the result of their early extinction and minimal documentation. Consensus was reached at a 1994 workshop on comparative Penutian at the University of Oregon that the families within the proposed phylums, California, Oregon, Plateau, and Chinookan clusters would eventually be shown to be genetically related. Subsequently, Marie-Lucie Tarpent reassessed Tsimshianic, a geographically isolated family in northern British Columbia, and concluded that its affiliation within Penutian is also probable. Some of the more recently proposed subgroupings of Penutian have been convincingly demonstrated. The Milwaukee and the Costanoan languages have been grouped into a Newtian language family by Catherine Callahan. Callahan has more recently provided evidence supporting a grouping of Utian and Yakutsin into a Yakutian family. There also seems to be convincing evidence for the Plateau Penutian grouping, which would consist of Klamath, Modoc, Malala, and the Sahaptian languages. History of the hypothesis. Etymology and pronunciation. The name Penutian is based on the words meaning two in the Wintuan, Maiduan, and Yakutsin languages and the Utian languages, although perhaps originally intended to be pronounced PN, UTN, which is indicated in some dictionaries. The term is pronounced PNUN by most if not all linguists. Initial concept of 5 core families. The original Penutian hypothesis, offered in 1913 by Roland B. Dixon and Alfred L. Kroeber, focused upon the close relationships among 5 California language families listed below: Maiduan languages, Miwok, Costanoan languages, Wintuan languages, Yakutsin languages. That original proposal has since been called alternately Core Penutian, California Penutian, or the Penutian kernel. In 1919, the same 2 authors published the linguistic evidence for the proposal. The grouping, like many of Dixon and Amp Kroeber's other phylum proposals, was based mostly on shared typological characteristics and not the standard methods used to determine genetic relationships. Starting from this early date, the Penutian hypothesis was controversial. Prior to the 1913 Penutian proposal of Dixon and Kroeber, Albert S. Gatchett had grouped Milwaukeean and Costanoan into a Mutsun group. That grouping, now termed Utian, was later conclusively demonstrated by Catherine Callahan. In 1903, Dixon and Amp Kroeber noted a positive relationship among Costanoan, Maidu, Winton, and Yakus within their central Maidu type, from which they excluded Milwaukeean. In 1910, Kroeber finally recognized the close relationship between the Milwaukeean and Costanoan languages. Sapir's expansion. In 1916, Edward Sapir expanded Dixon and Kroeber's California Penutian family with a sister stock, Oregon Penutian, which included the Kusan languages and also the isolates Siaslaw and Takelma, Oregon Penutian Kusan languages. Siaslaw Takelma. Later Sapir and Leo Frachtenberg added the Kalapuyan and the Chinookan languages, and then later the Alsine and Tsimshianic families, culminating in Sapir's 1921 4-branch classification I. California Penutian grouping Maiduan, Utian, Wintuan, Yokutsan. 2. Oregon Penutian grouping Kusin, Cieslaw, Takelma, Kalapuyan, Alcine. 3. Chinookan family IV, Simshianic family. By the time Sapier's 1929 Encyclopedia Britannica article was published, he had added 2 more branches: Plato-Penutian family Klamath Modoc Ilap Uink Ius Malala Sahapshan. Mexican Penutian grouping mixed Sokwav, resulting in a 6-branch family: California Penutian, Oregon Penutian, Chinookan, Simshianic, Plato Penutian, Mexican Penutian. Encyclopedia Britannica. Further expansions. Other linguists have suggested other languages be included within the Penutian grouping, macro-Penutian hypothesis, or have produced hypotheses of relationships between Penutian and other large-scale families. Amerind hypothesis. Note: some linguists link the Penutian hypothesis to the Zuni language. This link, earlier proposed by Stanley Newman, has now been shown to be the result of a hoax. Mid-20th century doubts. Scholars in the mid-20th century became concerned that similarities among the proposed Penutian language families may be the result of borrowing that occurred among neighboring peoples, not of a shared proto-language in the distant past. Mary Haas states the following regarding this borrowing: even where genetic relationship is clearly indicated, the evidence of diffusion of traits from neighboring tribes, related or not, is seen on every hand. This makes the task of determining the validity of the various alleged Hokan languages and the various alleged Penutian languages all the more difficult. Point up once again that diffusional studies are just as important for prehistory as genetic studies, and what is even more in need of emphasis, it points up the desirability of pursuing diffusional studies along with genetic studies. This is nowhere more necessary than in the case of the Hokan and Penutian languages wherever they may be found, but particularly in California, where they may very well have existed side by side for many millennia. Despite the concern of Haas and others, the consensus classification produced at a 1964 conference in Bloomington, Indiana, retained all of Sapier's groups for North America north of Mexico within the Penutian phylum. The opposite approach was taken following a 1976 conference at Oswego, New York, when Campbell and Mithun dismissed the Penutian phylum as undemonstrated in the resulting classification of North American language families. Recent hypotheses: California Penutian and Takelma Kalapuyan are no longer accepted as valid nodes by many Penutian researchers. However, Plato Penutian, Oregon Coast Penutian, and Yokyushan are increasingly supported. Scott Delancey suggests the following relationships within and among language families typically assigned to the Penutian phylum: Maritime Penutian Simshian, Chinook Oregon Coast Penutian Alci, Cieslaw Kuz, Inland Penutian Yokyushan Yushan Yokuz Maidu Plateau Penutian Sahapshan, Malala Klamath. The Wintuan languages, Takelma and Kalapuya, absent from this list, continue to be considered Penutian languages by most scholars familiar with the subject, often in an Oregonian branch, though Takelma and Kalapuya are no longer considered to define a branch of Penutian. Evidence for the Penutian hypothesis, perhaps because many Penutian languages have ablaut vowels, are difficult to reconstruct. However, consonant correspondences are common. For example, the Proto-Yoku's retroflexes *t* correspond to Klamath tt, whereas the Proto-Yoku's dental *t* correspond to Klamath alveolar dtt. Kalapuya, Takelma, and Wintu do not show such obvious connections, and Delancey has not investigated Mexican Penutian or other geographic outliers. Based on archaeological calculations, the Yokyushan family may be as old as Indo-European, and the Klamath tribes appear to have lived in their current location for NGT 7,000 years. Thus, the time depth of the proposed inland Penutian branch alone approaches the limits of what many think traditional historical reconstruction can determine. This is sometimes used as an argument against the Penutian hypothesis. Below is some Penutian sound correspondence is given by Lyle Campbell.